Welcome to the Top 12 Highlights from Chapter 4, looking at political culture and ideology. I'm Mr. Rodman, taking you through the highlights and the top 12. We begin with number 1, differences between political culture and ideology. The idea of political culture is what we share as widely held beliefs as society, versus ideology being my personal ideals or beliefs that I hold dear, based on what experiences I've had and what information I've been able to ascertain from my experiences. Those types of things are more the political ideology. They're shaped by my experiences, my environment, my learning, my family, and all those political socialization. Political culture is really what we share, like freedom and liberty. We all value those, but how we carry them out is more the ideological perspectives through the democratic values that we have in our political culture. Now, we do share some values, like I mentioned, liberty, freedom, security, the idea of justice, but where do these come from? Magleby says they come from the Protestant work ethic that we have. Economic individualism. You work hard, you earn lots of money, you pay your taxes, and then you keep the rest. That's the idea behind this. So the Protestant work ethic is the idea that you work hard, and through hard work you're going to be a better person and be a better member of society. And that's one of the things we've seen over time in our new nation as we developed, was that there was a shared value of that type of work ethic. So freedom, equality, liberty, all those things came from that work ethic. And capitalism, or the ideas of capitalism, really developed from that economic individualism that we see here. Now, how are we socialized? Number one, obviously the family, because we spend so much time with them when we're young. But our friends influence us. Those at school influence us, including our teachers and administrators, other friends and peers. People that we may know. And then our religion has a huge impact on the socialization that we have politically, as well as the media, what we listen to. And we'll talk more about that when we get to Unit 5 and the role of the media. But these all have a significant impact on the socialization of what we look at when we decide what we believe and the ideals that we hold dear. So we are, as part of that economic individualism and that shared work ethic, we are part of what we call a mixed market economy. We are not totally free market, because government does get involved when it comes to safety and product safety and the health and wellness of our citizens. But we certainly aren't a well-regulated or a heavily regulated economy either. So it really is the mixed market. We see government as essential to safety and security, but then taking a step back and letting business kind of do its thing, and letting individuals have choice and individual choice when it comes to the free market of ideas, of products and services that are being offered. So we looked at this cartoon before, the idea of welfare versus welfare reform, the perspectives that change as part of this economic individualism. How much personal responsibility do we require? How much do we suggest? What is the battle for getting ahead? Sometimes do people need an extra helping hand? And how can we help them with that, helping the disadvantaged in that regard, but keeping them from getting too reliant on different types of government programs so that they never get off of them. And that really is the welfare reform that we saw in the 1990s and in different programs and that have taken shape since then. Now, ideologically speaking, and we'll get to the kind of the breakdown on this at the very end, but the idea here we have different ideologies, and we see this through liberalism and conservatism, probably the two most popular, and then we would see this through libertarianism and what the textbook calls socialism and communism, which is sometimes also labeled totalitarianism. Now, remember, we value freedom, we value justice, and we value liberty. But how we carry that out really becomes that ideological nature of our politics, of our American political ideology. And so breaking those down, we see that most people are in the middle in this circle that we see here. But depending on how much government interaction or control the government has is really going to depend on where we fall in this grid. So liberalism being more so on government control economically, but less so socially. Conservatism, the opposite, more government control or interaction on the social front or political front, less so on the economic front. And then libertarianism, less government all the way around, and totalitarianism or socialism, a lot more government all the way around. So very different in terms of those approaches. So we look at liberalism, the idea that government should focus on justice and equality of opportunity, making sure that citizens have access to health care and that it's equal access to those types of things, including education and housing, individual choice when it comes to same-sex marriage or abortion, and then workers' health and safety on the job and around the job, which leads to the promotion of unions and different protections that are in place for those workers and for consumers. Conservatism looks at, again, government intervention on the social side, less so on the economic front. So limited government, very much so. A smaller government except for defense. The idea of a more moral code to keep the order, and citizens would be more reliant on that individual self-actualization to be able to do things for themselves, pull them up by their bootstraps, and work hard. And that Protestant work ethic really comes through in what we see here. Now, breaking down traditional versus religious conservatives, we see traditional conservatives are more pro-business, more about deregulation or less regulation in government interaction with business, and religious conservatives or social conservatives are more focused on the morality aspects. So in terms of abortion, in terms of same-sex marriage and that kind of thing, they would be more living towards the moral code. And that would be very different from a traditional conservative. Now, obviously, they align and form coalitions in order to win elections, and we've seen that with the Trump administration. Some in the administration being more religious or social conservative, some being more traditional conservative, but they all come together in order to win elections, in order to keep the critical mass. Now, liberalism, there's a lot of critics related to this, saying it's too much government. It destroys individualism because you've relied too much on government creating a welfare state or a nanny state. And what we see is sometimes, and Elizabeth Warren is a good example of this type of liberalism, because she's basically saying, yeah, but people don't start from a level playing field. There's an equity aspect here that doesn't exist and isn't fair, and that idea of fairness when it comes to the substantive due process, if you will, in terms of individual rights and free speech, that tends to take a toll and have an impact. So we see the emergence of progressivism coming out of this in terms of governments involved to help people get a leg up, and in order to level the playing field around what government can do to help them, but not necessarily stay there forever. And that really is where we've seen kind of progressivism in the 21st century kind of take off. Conservatism, we've seen a lot of critics around this as well. Deregulation doesn't work, leads to business doing its own thing, which leads to all kinds of problems that then leads to an economic collapse like we saw in 2008, or it leads to the jungle, as we saw at turn of the century in the early 1900s. Where government does its own thing, and the worker is basically left to fend for themselves. So we see very different approaches in terms of those endorsements, but the idea is that they really are focused on less government versus liberalism, which is more government is part of the solution. Conservatism looks at it and says government isn't the solution, government is the problem. So then we get to the totalitarianism aspect, socialism being public ownership of things, and some level of different types of rewards for individualism, but again, very muted in terms of that approach. Communism, essentially collective ownership, and everything goes into the pool. You work hard and make lots of money on a particular project or invention, and it goes back into the collective pool. You really don't keep any more than what is your fair share of that, versus the economic individualism we have. If you become the next Steve Jobs at Apple or the next Google guys and make billions of dollars, you get to keep it once you've paid your taxes. And you should be rewarded for that ingenuity and innovation and technological prowess. Those are things that have helped you, encouraged you, and motivated you to do as well as you have, and yielded the success you have. And that is really the difference here in terms of breaking that down. Now, libertarianism, quite the opposite of totalitarianism or socialism, communism, because it's basically getting government out of our lives. Remember, going back to the founders and framers, they look at the founders as government was only there for protection of private property and to maintain order, and really it should stay in those types of capacities. So you see them much more liberal on social issues because they want government to get out of the way, much more conservative on economic ones because they want government to get out of the way on those types of issues. So they're all in for government getting all out in their perspective and their approach. Now, to break this down, remember I said we take it into kind of social political policy versus economic policy. These really are the differences. So we see pure liberals have a liberal ideology, liberal socially, liberal economically. They want government to step in economically for the social safety net, for social programs that people have paid into, like Social Security, and to get extra help on programs like Medicaid, where they just need a level playing field. But they're less so on the social policy front. They don't want government involved when it comes to freedom to an abortion, or the right to an abortion, or right to choice, as well as same-sex marriage or rights of the accused. They want government to take a step back and get out of the way. And pure conservatives argue the complete opposite of that along those approaches. They want government involvement in terms of that moral code, more anti-abortion and anti-same-sex marriage, more so in terms of bringing prayer back into schools and having more religious-led actions related to that. But they want government out of the economic policy, getting government out of the way when it comes to economic issues, and cutting back on those welfare programs and social safety nets that lead to people wanting to be on the programs, the social government programs forever. So they are very different in that approach. Now, libertarians, as I said, they agree with liberals on the social policy. They agree with conservatives on the economic one. They just want government out, protect private property, maintain order, and then get out of the way. And then totalitarians, essentially government all in. On the conservative ideology on the social front, liberalism approach to the economic front in those terms, and very, very different, the ideological opposites of the libertarian approach. So hopefully that helps break down the four most common. As I said, totalitarian, we see it used as the idea of communism or socialism. We've seen both aspects of that kind of fitting into that particular box. Now, Downs' theory of rational choice, remember Anthony Downs, the political scientist, basically said there are a lot of people on the left, there are a lot of people on the right. There are even people that label themselves as liberals or conservatives. But most people are in the middle. They're independents or they're IDKs. They're moderates. They just don't know how they'd vote. They swing to the left in one election, and one side wins. They swing to the left, swing to the right in the other election, and then the other side wins. So a lot of the elections today are held by capturing that center, And Downs' theory of rational choice says, in order to win elections, if you're going to continue to win elections, you've got to capture the people in the middle. You can't just appeal to the base. You've got to capture those people in the middle because that's going to swing the election. And we saw that in 2016. We saw that again in 2018, swinging the pendulum in totally different directions, but those same voters voting very differently and having an impact on Washington as a result. Hope you found this helpful. This concludes the top 12 highlights from Chapter 4. Good luck on the upcoming quiz, test, and the AP exam. Live the 5.